Hey fam, welcome back to another episode. Today's one is gonna be interesting. We're gonna see what wants to come out. I wanted to come on here and talk about so many interesting things have been happening, and I've had some really intense right shoulder trap pain the last few days, and I've been working with it, and a lot of stuff has been coming up to be purged, to be seen, to be, I see you, I hear you, I love you, I release you, is what I typically say. And anyways, I've been working with this pain, and it all feels old. Like, it doesn't feel like anything new. But something that came up this morning, which was really wild and trippy, but I feel called to share because it feels significant in some sort of way. So I did 3 soul retrievals, which, if you don't know what a soul retrieval is, it's where you can basically go, you can observe a certain age at which an event happened, right? So the initial crack, as I like to say, and you can essentially set that part of you free. And so basically how I do soul retrievals is I'm able to visualize that, say, 5-year-old version of me, right? And a lot of times I will get whatever the event was, whatever the situation was, I'll either see it in my mind's eye, or my inner child will talk to me and share what it is. And so I was in the midst of doing 3 soul retrievals this morning. One was, I was 5, 8, and 13. I didn't get all the details on them, which sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Sometimes I just see the age and I can feel, and I just allow it to release rather than going back into the story and all the different things, right? Because really, guys, our story is just a map. We don't have to keep dragging it around with us, right? It's kind of like a treasure map that leads you back home. Like, it's not something that you have to keep going back into every single time you think about it or share about it or anything like that. And it's really like extracting what the lesson was and take that away rather than taking and going back into the emotion and everything, right? Unless you're like you're releasing the emotion that goes with it, right? And so I did these 3 soul retrievals, which all felt really powerful in their own way. And I got to the end of that, and normally I'll just, put healing in place and go about the rest of my day. And basically also with the soul retrieval, I'm able to visualize that part of me. And then when they are ready, I first off ask them what happened, what did they need? And then I ask them if they have any gifts for me and if they're ready to go to the light. And a lot of times they just want to be loved, seen, heard, whatever the case is, right? Lots of typical inner child things. And if you're someone who, this is like things that I wish I knew in the beginning. But like being able to talk to your inner child and connect with your inner child is so important. And like a daily practice that I did during the beginning of my journey was sitting with my inner child every single morning and asking her if like what she needed, if she had anything to say to me, just allowing that container of safety to be built so that she could come forward, because at first she didn't want anything to do with me. And really talking with your inner child is just reparenting in a way, right? And so I started doing that in the beginning of my journey. I did it with my inner child and I did it with my inner teen, and I've created this safety container for them to exist in. And so these things come up and I just allow them to come up, and I sit with them if I need to, and if not, then we just let them come up and I release them to the light and we move about our day. And so these ones were interesting because my 13-year-old self was probably the most painful out of all of them. And I was finding, which this doesn't typically happen, but as I was seeing all of them, I was realizing normally it's resistance on the opposite end, where like they don't want to go to the light, and I have to kind of let them hang for a little bit until they're ready, right? And usually it doesn't take very long. Usually it's pretty quick. I'm like, okay, you can sit here for as long as you need to, and like most times it doesn't take very long. But this time I was realizing that I was having a hard time letting them go, which I thought was so interesting, because normally I have zero problems letting them go, but there was so much resistance that was coming up today. And so I had to sit with that before I could actually let them go. And my 13-year-old went first, and that was probably the most like felt in my body, was my 13-year-old. And when I was finally ready to let her go, I opened up the light, my great-gram came through, and then, you know, she went with my great-gram. And for those of you that don't know, my great-gram is White Mem. If you ever hear me refer to her on these episodes, her name is White Mem, was White Mem. She passed away in 2017, but she's my ride or die chick. She's still my ride or die chick. She was my backseat queen when I was car camping, and just always my like number one star and person that looks after me. And her and I had a special bond. We kind of did like the whole life cycle together. Like she took care of me when I was born, and then I took care of her when she was dying. And so we just had like a really beautiful, special connection, and I just have so much love for her. And yeah, so she's been really key along my journey and with my gifts opening up and all the different things. But anyways, so I let my 13-year-old go. Then my 5-year-old wanted to go next. I was like, oh, it's so interesting that it didn't go, 1385 or whatever. And so my 5-year-old comes up, and she was like wholeheartedly ready to go. Like she gave me a hug, and she just like peaced out, and she like went and skipping through that light so freaking quick. And I was like, oh my God, I like barely had any time to process. So I had a good sob over that one. And then my 8-year-old, I had almost no emotions with her, but there was just this beautiful sense of peace and tranquility and creativity that felt like it was just like the light was like flowing through me. It was one of the most beautiful experiences. And after I got done with all three of those, again, normally I just finish that up and go about my day. Like I do them so quick now too that like normally this stuff doesn't come up, and I was like, wow, this is really interesting. Like, but anyways, processed all that. And for context with this next part, to my knowledge, if I've done this, it's only been a time or two. It's not something that I've done religiously, and also it's different than journeying, right? So journeying is really going inward. This next thing that happened was time traveling. It's the only way that I can describe time traveling. And if you've ever seen The Time Traveler's Wife, that's probably the best reference that I have. And what's funny is I just watched that movie last week, and I was like, there's a reason why I'm watching this movie. And I find it so interesting because I realized when I was watching it, I'm like, I don't think I've ever actually seen this movie all the way through to the end. I think I've seen like the beginning part and not actually all the way through. And I'm like, this is interesting that this is coming up at a time like this. So anyways, I watched the movie, I made note of it, which, by the way, guys, if you get the urge to watch something or read something or whatever the case, just do it. Don't ask questions. Don't be like, oh, that's fucking weird, I'm not going to do that. Like, just do it. If you feel called to something, follow that, because there's likely something there for you, even if you don't realize it in the moment, you might realize it later. So this is the part of being awake. This is the part of, raising consciousness and all the things. Like, it's so cool that you get to follow all these synchronicities and see where they lead. And it's literally like it's like treasure hunting. It's the best way I can describe it. It's like fucking Goonies out here with myself. But I have friends that partake in this, and I'm just like, this is so fucking cool. And then if you really get into it, you start logging and doing all this stuff. Shout out Tony, because Tony got me logging, and I'm still not the best logger, but we start logging syncs and stuff and when they're happening, and you can start to see threads. Because you're not living, something that we both touched on this morning is like, you stop living the Groundhog Day of every single day, it's the same thing, and you start noticing these little pieces that are kind of interweaved with different days and different events and why things are happening, and you start to see a much bigger picture than just being in, I don't know, the 9 to 5 day to day, if you will. That's the best way I can describe it. Anyways, back to my time travel experience. Also, my eyes are super blue today. Oh, that's so fun. I swear after every purge, my eyes get bluer. I don't know why, but anyways, here we are. Yeah. That felt good to take a deep breath. So, this next part with the time traveling. Again, things I don't normally talk about and or have experienced, right? Like, that's the other thing, is I really have not experienced time traveling in this sense. And I feel like it might have happened once or twice before, but I didn't fully understand what was happening. And that typically happens when my gifts, like, shit starts happening and I'm just like going along with it. And then, like, next thing I know, I get verbiage for it, like either a couple days down the road, weeks, months, years down the road. And I'm just like, oh shit, I've been doing that for years. That's what happened with journeying. Like, I didn't realize the process of journeying, guys, is getting into a trance-like state, right? Which for some of us who have done it in past lives, you get to the point where you don't necessarily have to be in a trance-like state to do the things. And for journeying, you get into a trance-like state, usually with shamanic drums, and you journey inwards, right? And you gather information, and then you can journey on other people, and there's so many different things, and I can make more videos about that. But anyways, what I find interesting is that when I was, it was 2022, so it was right after my divorce, I was going into a trance-like state through meditation and like staring out at the mountains that were outside my window. And I had these rad experiences where I would feel myself go almost like an elevator, like above the clouds. It was literally going to the upper world. And I would see my great-grandma, and I would see my pep, and I would see like so many people. Like the first time it ever happened, I got up there and everyone started cheering and clapping and celebrating. And they were like, "You made it!" And I was like, where the fuck am I? Still in my physical body, but not in my physical body. Anyways, so I had this wild experience in my first apartment back in 2022 post-divorce. And it was me going to the upper world. And I had done that quite a few times. Didn't have verbiage for it until 2024. And then I started shamanic healing and going through that whole journey, and doing journeying was like jumping back in the driver's seat, like, oh, I've done this before, you know? And that's with a lot of my gifts. That is, I jump back in the driver's seat, like, oh yeah, I've done this. It's like when you learn to drive a stick and you don't drive it for a long time, and then you get back in the driver's seat, you're like, okay, I gotta drive stick again. Like, it just happens. It's just like riding a bike. Anyways, so this morning, I got done with my soul retrievals, and all of a sudden, I was laying there, and I was having this intense pain in my right shoulder. I'm like, why the fuck won't this go away? Like, I've done so much work on this in the last couple days. Like, usually stuff doesn't linger like the way that this has been lingering, right? And all of a sudden, I was back in this field behind my aunt's house. And okay, brief intermission. So I was at my aunt's house, and for context, I was, let's see, this was November of 2009. I was still in high school, but we were just doing, farm town stuff, right? So I was with my then boyfriend, and we were in this field at my aunt's house, and we were driving her Jeep around. And what ended up happening was we were coming around a corner, and he was, we were not going fast at all, but we also were not belted, and we were driving this Jeep, and whatever happened, we came around the corner, and the Jeep ended up turning on its side. And because I wasn't belted, when my side hit, my head hit the glass, right? And so I went out for a second, and we rolled. That's all I can say by, what the vehicle looked like afterwards. And vehicle rolled, and we ended up, when I came to, he was in a somersault position. I went out the back of the vehicle, and we both ended up being fine, right? But this moment this morning that I had was I came, I don't know even know how to describe it. It was like I saw my then self walking towards me in the field, and I ran up to her, and I was like, hey. And she's just looking at me super disoriented. And I remember in that moment when I came out of the Jeep, I was walking not aimlessly across the field, but I was trying to get to the other side of the field where to head back towards the house. And I just grabbed her by the shoulders, and she just looks at me, and she's like, what are you doing here? She was obviously seeing the mirror, obviously. And I'm like, I'm from the future. And she's like, what? I'm like, you just got in an accident. You're okay. And I was putting healing in her neck, because again, things that I know now as, you know, being an ER nurse and doing all the things, like I didn't know these things then. And so, so funny, just things that you do when you're younger. I was like putting healing in her neck. Like I had my hands like on this part of my shoulders, basically. And she was like, what are you doing? And I'm like, just take some deep breaths. You're okay. Like trying to like, you know, reorient her and guide her and like let her know what was going on. And I'm like, hey, like I came back for you because we've already experienced this, but like, you need to know, like, you're going to be okay. And a huge thing that was coming up with this shoulder pain and everything I've been having is like, you can put down the backpack, you don't have to carry it anymore. And it's so beautiful, right? But it's also like, what the frick? And that pain that I'm having is where you would typically carry a backpack. And I remember I stayed home for a few days after this whole thing happened. And I basically, it was like 2 or 3 days I stayed home. And then when I went back to school, I had to carry my backpack. My backpack had all my books and stuff in it. So it was very heavy and very uncomfortable because it was pulling on this part of my neck that I like was having issues with. And anyways, so I just thought that was so interesting that I ended up back in this area. And I was putting healing in her, you know, shoulders and her neck. And it was just such a wild experience. I was like, holy shit. Like, not that I had forgotten that happened, but it's, my recall is not what it used to be, meaning if I need to know something, it will be presented to me. I don't necessarily go and look for it, if that makes sense. And so after this got done, I was like, okay, that's all done. I like came back and I was here in my room and the pain was still going on. I'm like, my right shoulder is connected to my left hip. And then I got fucking portaled back out. And I was like, what is going on here? So in, let's see, December of, what year was that? 2020? Yeah. December of 2020, I found out I was pregnant. And I got portaled back into my bathroom in the house that I owned with my husband at the time. And I've made previous videos about this whole thing with my pregnancy. You can feel free to look back if you are curious about that. But I've done a lot of healing with this throughout the years, so since 2020. And I found out on 12/12 of 2020 that I was pregnant. And I remember sitting in my bathroom. I was 4 days late for my period. I knew something was off because I was never late for my period. I'd gone off birth control a year prior. And I was like, if I don't wake up, this was Friday. I was like, if I don't wake up tomorrow morning and have my period, then I have to take a test. So I woke up, shot out of bed at like 6 o'clock on Saturday morning, was not bleeding, took 3 positive pregnancy tests. Yeah, your girl started freaking out because I was like, I can't do this. And I had this really intense vision of me. I had just left mind you, I had just left working in the ER. And it was so interesting because I had this vision of me basically sitting in this hospital gown, if you will, in that ER that I worked in only had one isolation psych room. Everything else was pretty much open. And I was sitting in this one isolated room by myself in the corner. I looked like I was 7 months pregnant. I was rocking back and forth. And I had this intense vision. I was like, oh my God, I tried to hurt myself. And so in that moment, I was like, I can't have this baby. Like, I'm going to end up like my mom. And like, that's not fair to this child. And I was having like this full circle moment. And it was like, I had 2 paths. I could either continue taking the path that, you know, was happening at that current moment, which was, you know, stay married, go through the pregnancy, all the things, or I could choose to have an abortion and see where that took me. And I ended up choosing to have an abortion a week before Christmas that year. And what's wild is I portaled back to that day today. And I sat literally, I I ended up back on the floor of that bathroom. And I was staring at myself, and I was just sitting there like with the pregnancy test, just like, oh my God. And I was like, hey, she just like looks up, kind of like same thing that happened in the field. She was like, what's going on? I'm like, oh, hi, from the future. And so we were, you know, I was like, yes, you're pregnant. You're going to be okay. You're going to have an abortion. You're going to have the talk with Zach. Like, you're going to have to do all these things. And so, like, so I end up having this conversation with her, and I'm like running her through kind of like what happens from there on out. And again, like, I don't have a fucking guidebook for this shit. Like, I'm just raw dogging it out here. And so I have this conversation with her, and she's just like, okay. I'm like, it's gonna be a wild couple of years, but it's gonna be okay. And like, there's gonna be a lot of changes. You're gonna be okay. And she's just like, okay, like terrified, but also like understood what was happening at the same time. And I fully believe that that was I don't want to say destiny swap, but that was like a moment with which like that was like a choice. Like that was like the biggest choice. It was like, you can keep going down this path, or you can go down this new one, and you can see where it takes you, even if it's scary AF. And so I went down the new path. Obviously I'm here, but I will say, like, I dealt with a lot of grief over that situation for a really long time. And not even grief, like I didn't process the grief when everything initially happened. And then, you know, the years that followed, right? The following year after everything, I had a ovarian cyst on my left ovary. A couple of years later, I find a shamanic healer, and she goes in, and like I was having all this stuff come up around it. It was around that same time of year too. And she was like, yeah, you're like ready to let all of that go, basically. And so I thought it was interesting that it was coming up again today, because I've been shedding some older stuff that I thought I was done with, but sometimes there's one final layer that has to come up. And, you know, it's about taking the lessons from everything and knowing that those moments, they were pivotal for a reason. And a lot of that happened for a reason to get me to where I am now. And it's not to, I mean, yes, there is some shame and guilt around it, right? I would be lying if I said I didn't, but I've processed through a lot of that, but also accepting that, like, that had to happen in order for me to get where I am now. And one, I say all of this because I hope that if you're watching this and you're going through something similar, I hope it gives you, I don't even know, some sort of courage to choose yourself, because that's what I had to do. And that was not the easiest thing to do at the time. In fact, yes, it's all over the internet, but I have not truly like told a lot of people that up until I was like, okay, I'm just gonna offload this and like see what happens, you know. And so yeah, I have guilt over things, but it's not in like a really heavy way. It's more so like I've made peace with it. And I think that's the important thing, is like, you can feel shame and guilt over situations, but it's making peace with it and making peace with the situation and knowing that it happened to get you where you are, and knowing that those lessons are important for you, were important for you, and like, what can you take from them, right? It's kind of like when you're reading a book for school. It's like, what are you actually absorbing? What are you taking with you forward? And so anyways, I had to share all of that because it was the wildest, trippiest experience to be able to literally go back and like sit with myself. And again, I feel like I've done this a time or two before, but this was like the most potent because I felt like I was back there, but like not necessarily like, yeah, I can remember the feelings of those moments, right? Of being scared and all the things, but like at the same time, there was this deep sense of peace, like knowing things would be okay. And so I feel like, you know, time not being relevant, like it's these scenarios that really like pull it together, if you will. So anyways, that was a lot. I feel like there's always a lot when I do these episodes. There's always like good little like nuggets. Oh, I just saw 12/12. Love that. So yeah. And it's okay to experience grief about situations that have happened. Like, I feel like grief is healthy. And even though it sucks at times, it's really, really beautiful. And something I saw on TikTok that kind of sparked all of this was like, death is beautiful. If you just see it for what it is and accept it for what it is, like, death is beautiful. Death is not meant to be scary. And really, it's just you returning home to you in your most purest form, right? Because I always say that when we leave here and we go back to the ethers or wherever you believe, right? Then we return to love. We return to that original source that we were created and brought in from, which is really, really beautiful. So anyways, I think that's it for today, y'all. Yeah, I think that's it. I love you so much. Feel free to like, comment, share, subscribe, follow me, Lynn Shelto, on all platforms. Yeah, my one-on-ones are open. Everything is linked to my bio. All my books, my guides, all the things I've written are linked to my bio here. And yeah, I'm excited to share more with y'all about whatever these new things that are unlocking are. I think it's really beautiful though. So yeah, I'll see you on the next one.